Hello, I'm Tim Shoebridge for Cherry Audio, and today I am delighted to be able to finally walk you through, talk you through, show you and play you Cherry Audio's latest sonic creation. This product has been over a year in the making. Everyone at Cherry Audio has worked incredibly hard on it, and they are incredibly proud of it. It is, of course, the GX-80. So what is the Cherry Audio GX-80? Well, it's a very clever combination of two of Yamaha's most iconic instruments ever made back in the 1970s, the CS-80 and the GX-1. Now, we all know the CS-80, one of the most desirable, rare and expensive analog polysynths ever made. Everybody wants one, but hardly any of us are ever going to get to play one, let alone own one. And then there's the GX-1, or the Dream Machine, as Stevie Wonder famously named it. Even more rare, even more expensive, and even more out of reach for us all. Now, it was the GX-1 back in 1975, even though it resembled an organ in so many ways, that laid down the foundations of Yamaha's entry into the analog polysynth market. It was the GX-1's main sound-generating circuitry and one of its manuals, its full-size keyboards, that ended up being transplanted into a much smaller, lighter and more affordable instrument, the CS-80, just 2 years later in 1977. Right, so let's get hands-on with this GX-80. It's a wonderful looking synthesizer, isn't it? It's also looking a little bit formidable. And what I find is that, one of the best ways to get used to a new synthesizer and figure out how to use it is actually, if it has presets, is to look at the factory presets and kind of figure out how they were made. Now, the GX-80 comes with loads and loads of really wonderful presets. I've got one here loaded. It's called Ambient Sunshine Keys. It sounds like this. Quite a complicated sound, isn't it? There's a lot going on with that patch. Now, we know that the CS-80, one of the reasons why it creates such incredible sounds, or is capable of creating such incredible sounds, is not only its poly aftertouch capability, but also the fact that it has got these two completely separate synth engines, or ranks, as they're called in CS-80 parlance. You'll see them here, numbered 1 and 2. Totally separate independent synth engines. They've got their own oscillator settings, filter settings, envelope generator settings and stuff like that. And so you can create some very, very different timbres with these two ranks. And that's, that's the power of the CS-80. Now what we've got here with the GX-80 and was in the original GX-1, we've actually got two loads of these. The GX-1 had two manuals, two keyboards, each with their own independent synth engines, and behind those synth engines were these two ranks. Now, with the GX-1, it was all about presets. You had sort of fairly limited control over how to sculpt the sounds. It was a preset-driven instrument. Obviously, with the CS-80, we've got all of these different controls so that we have full control over the sounds that we're creating. But you have these two ranks per layer with the GX-80, and that's what I'll show you now. Now, this particular patch is utilizing those two layers, and at the moment we're looking at here the settings for the upper layer. If I click on this button, we'll see the settings for the lower layer. And the first thing you notice there is there is a color coding change. The lower layer is in orange and the upper layer is in white. This color coding is very important because what it is doing is it is showing you the features that are GX1 specific, not CS80 specific. So you'll see here there are some controls on the front panel that are orange, and these are all analog circuits that were available and utilized in the GX1, which you don't have in the CS80. We've got a dedicated resonant high pass filter that you can apply to the square wave on each rank. We've got a dedicated resonant bandpass filter that you can apply to the sawtooth on each rank. We've got a dedicated triangle waveform that's not there on the CS80, but it was there available to us with the GX1. And the GX1 also had its own rather unique filter. It was a combination of low pass and high pass filter. It's got a unique sound. We'll listen to it in a little while, but Cherry Audio have given us a control here so that we can switch between CS80 filter or GX1 filter. And there's another switch here called inverse filter envelope. So the GX1 allowed you to actually flip and invert the filter envelope, which you can't do on a CS80, but we've got the ability to do it here with these orange controls. So orange controls, very important. They're showing you what is GX1 specific. You don't need to use these features if you don't want to, but they're there to sort of extend the sonic capabilities of the synthesizer. But what I'm going to show you now is kind of like break down this patch a little bit so we can see the building blocks of it and start to understand how it works. So this, with the orange coding here, this is the lower layer, and as I said before, with white it's the upper layer. We can listen to those layers individually by soloing them by clicking on this button here. So now I'm just going to listen to the upper layer when I play. And lower layer. And when we're soloing a layer, we can actually solo the individual ranks. Let's just listen to rank number 3 on its own. As opposed to rank number 4. Now you'll hear there as I'm playing that you've got that wide stereo. Rank number 3 is only in one channel, rank number 4 is in the other channel. They're panned really hard left and right. And this is one of the features that Cherry Audio have added, obviously not there in the original. Each of these ranks has got its own pan control, as you can see here. So you have, with 2 layers, you've got 4 ranks that you can place within the stereo field wherever you want to. You can get some really huge, massive and wonderful sounds out of the GX80. Right, let's have a listen to a different patch. Now this is a patch that started off as a factory preset and then I fiddled around with it and adjusted it a bit. It sounds like this. Very atmospheric, very cinematic, love it. Now this is another dual layer patch. Let's solo those layers and see and hear what they sound like. So I'm going to solo the upper layer first of all. It sounds like this. Basically exactly the same. And then let's listen to the lower. It sounds like this. Not very impressive, is it? That's the bit that I added, the second layer. Now I've designed this second layer with polyphonic aftertouch in mind, and that's what I want to talk about next. I mean, clearly the CS80 was infamous as a polyphonic aftertouch beast of an analog synthesizer, made famous, of course, by the genius that was Vangelis. So this controller keyboard I've got down here is not polyphonic aftertouch enabled at all. And that's what we hear. But if I turn to my other keyboard. I know it's a Mellotron, but it is actually Polyphonic aftertouch enabled. And I play that same patch over here, and I push down on the keys. Now you'll hear that second layer. So let's just take off the solo and listen to the whole thing on this keyboard. The GX-80 has got such incredible control over the sound and how you can manipulate it with Polyphonic aftertouch. Obviously that functionality was there in the CS80 and it's here in the GX-80 as well. It really is a wonderful part of this synthesizer. It's a wonderful part of its history, but also of its capabilities, and I really do strongly suggest that you have a go with a Polyphonic aftertouch enabled keyboard, or if you've got a monophonic aftertouch channel pressure keyboard instead, then the GX80 has got a little trick up its sleeve to allow you to play last note priority Polyphonic aftertouch style, which is very, very cool. Right, so let's dig a little deeper into the GX80 and take a look at its sound generation capabilities. Now what I've got here is an initialized preset, or a new preset. And by default that initialized preset is just a single layer preset, but it has got both of the ranks enabled. So what I'm going to do is just disable this one, so we're just listening to just one rank on its own, and it sounds like this. So you can see that the rank is broken down into a VCO section, VCF section, VCA section, and then some expression controls towards the end. Let's just take a look at the VCO section. Now we've got a couple of waveforms here which we can turn on and off with a switch, so they're either full on or they're off. And by default we're listening to the sawtooth here. But we've also got a pulse wave. And we've got some pulse wave manipulation capabilities. We can change that pulse width. And we've got modulation over it as well. Now, in addition to those two basic waveforms, we've got some capabilities that the GX1 had. We have got a resonant high-pass filtered version of that pulse wave, which we can introduce with this slider. And this is the cutoff control for it. Now this is before we get into the filter section, you have to realise. It's pre-filtering. And this waveform is available in addition to these ones. So we have them both at the same time. And likewise, we've got the similar kind of thing with the sawtooth. We've got our regular sawtooth, but we've also got a filtered version of it here, but this time it's a resonant bandpass filter. So we've got those four sources of waveforms, the two sort of standard waveforms and the two filtered waveforms. But in addition to that, and this was again a GX1 only capability, we've got a triangle wave here. Now there is one more waveform, but it's all the way over here on the right hand side. It's here, it's a sine wave. And the reason it's over here is because these waveforms all feed through in the signal path into the filter section. whereas the sine wave is applied after the filter section. And if you think about it, that's a very good place to put the sine wave. To have it unfiltered is great for adding weight and depth to the sound once you've sculpted it with the filters. Right, let's take a look and listen to the filter section next. Now, as I intimated before, there are two flavors of filter section. There's a CS80 emulation and a GX1. We'll come on to the differences between the two a little bit later on. Let's just go with CS80 to start off with, and we'll just have a look at some of these controls here and what they do. So we've actually got two filters here. We've got a high-pass filter, which is resonant, and a low-pass filter, which is resonant. We've got standard controls. The green controls are the cutoff frequencies, and the red controls are resonance. So let's just have a little listen to the low pass filter. Let's whack up some resonance, say 50%, 100%. Now, I hadn't had any previous experience playing a CS80 or even playing a CS80 software emulation, and when I started to play around with the filter section here, I was a little bit disappointed at how lackluster it sounded. What I didn't realise though is that we've got some sort of master controls down here in this section. Now, these controls affect both of the ranks simultaneously. They are like a master tune control, if you like. We've got a control here, red one for resonance and a green one for filter cutoff. And in Yamaha parlance, they call it brilliance, which is why we've got that brill there. So with these kind of flappy controls on the CS80, upwards means minimum value, downwards means maximum value. So we have to pull this down for an initialized patch. It's basically off. So we pull it down to maximum, and now we'll get a better resonance response from our low pass filter, like this. It's a far more familiar sound, isn't it? So that's the low pass filter, and we've got a resonant high pass filter. Let's whack up some resonance in that. All the way up to maximum. So we've got, as I said before, two flavors. That's the CS80. Let's have just a very quick listen to the GX1. It's not such a steep slope on the filters. I can't remember off the top of my head what the slope is. It's an odd number. I'll pop it up on the screen when I'm editing this, so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the low pass filter. And you can hear we get resonance even when the resonance control is down at minimum, because we've got this overall resonance control turned up. Let's see what happens at maximum. It sounds like a more driven sound to me. That's the low pass, and here is the high pass. And maximum. They're very nice sounding filters, especially for a polysynth. Alright, let's look at these other controls here. Now we're getting on to the envelope for the filter. It's a dedicated filter envelope section. And this is where there's an awful lot of confusion on the internet and a little bit of misinformation as well by some people. It is just a classic ADSR envelope in terms of the shape that you generate. However, the controls are not classic ADSR. It's a bit strange that Yamaha did it this way with the filter section, considering that over here on the VCA section we do have a classic ADSR envelope here, ADSR, but with the filter envelope we just have A, D and R. There is no S. There's no way to set the sustain with a dedicated control. Now if you imagine the shape of an ADSR envelope like shown on a piece of graph paper, basically you've got that classic shape. Now if you imagine that the sustain portion on that graph is at a level of 0 and the graph can go above 0 and below 0, that's what we've got here with this envelope. Sustain is always at 0. Now how much of the envelope goes below 0 and above 0 is controlled by these two controls here. IL means initial level and AL means attack level. So initial level is where the whole envelope starts, from the beginning of the attack to the end of the release. And as you can see here by the numbers, its maximum is 0 and its minimum is -5, so going below the sustain portion. And similarly, the attack level, this is indicating how high the attack portion reaches before it starts to drop down on its decay phase. And its minimum level is 0 and it can go all the way up to +5. So if you have these two controls here like this at their minimum and maximum, you are creating the sort of like the biggest sort of envelope effect, if you like. When they are both down at 0, your envelope is actually squashed down to nothing. You have no envelope effect whatsoever modulating the filters. So that's how you control the size of the envelope. And in terms of the amount of sustain, well, you control that by where the cutoff is, because that's going to give you the effect of the sustain portion, because the sustain portion is at 0. If that sounds complicated, it's not really. It is very different. If you've never sort of played around with this style of envelope before, it takes a little bit of getting your head around, but it does become intuitive, and I can see why Yamaha did implement it this way, although I've used so many synthesizers throughout my life that use a standard ADSR, so this certainly took a little bit of getting used to. Okay, so just a few more controls to go through on this rank number 1. We've got a VCF level control here, which is basically setting the level of the filtered signal, the signal that's coming out of the filter section. And the reason why we've got it is because, as I mentioned before, we have a sine wave here, which kicks in after the filtered section. So we can actually blend the sine wave with the filtered signal and get exactly the effect that we want. They really have thought of everything with this synthesizer. So that's those two. Then we have, as I mentioned before, a standard ADSR envelope for the amplitude and an overall level control as well. And Cherry Audio have added a pan control here on each rank, so you can create some really wonderful stereo soundscapes. Final set of controls over the right hand side here are related to aftertouch, polyphonic aftertouch. The final two controls are relating to this sort of the maximum effect of applying aftertouch, and the first two controls are setting that initial level before you apply aftertouch. So you really have got very fine control over the aftertouch response. And the two things that we can affect with aftertouch here are brilliance, which is overall frequency cutoff, and level. But talking of aftertouch, if we look down here, we'll see there's a bunch more controls, these flappy controls, to affect aftertouch response sort of globally across both of those ranks. We can affect the filter cutoff, we can affect the oscillator frequency, the pitch, which is modulatable, and we can affect the speed of that modulation. And you'll see here it's got the legend sub oscillator. Over here, I haven't mentioned before, but over here on the left hand side is a sub oscillator. Well, actually, we would call it an LFO. It's a low frequency oscillator. They used back in the 70s the phrase sub-oscillator. But with the sub-oscillator, you've got a whole variety of different waveforms. You can synchronize it, which is something that Cherry Audio have added in there for syncing to MIDI clock. But we've got a speed control. We can modulate pitch, filter cutoff, and amplitude for those sort of standard kind of effects. And we can affect that modulation here with our touch response. You know, there's a whole load of things here that I haven't mentioned across the front panel, which I don't have time for in this video. It would take a whole series of videos to go through all of this stuff. One thing I didn't mention, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the oscillators, is that the way you set their pitch, their sort of their coarse tuning, is with these octave settings here, these octave ranges. And there are some weird and wonderful octave ranges here which were only available on the GX1, not on the CS80. And then we've got fine-tune, detune control of each of the ranks over here with these paddles. There's so much here to talk about, so much to go through. It's a real wonderful experience to go and find out this stuff and figure out how it works and you know, create some wonderful sounds with it. But even if you're not you know, feeling too confident about going around and playing around with these individual controls, there's so much fun you can have creating sounds from the wonderful set of factory presets that are provided. If I just click on this little utilities button here, we get a menu up. And it's not a very deep menu, it's very, very easy to understand. Basically what you're able to do here with this menu system is take these settings in this rank and copy them to the one below, or vice versa, go from number 2 back up to number 1. You can copy the whole layer settings that you've got here from the upper and copy them to the lower, or from the lower to the upper. You can reset individual ranks, reset individual layers, you can swap around. And for me, the most fun part of all is this import-export option at the bottom here. What you can basically do is copy a single rank or a single layer into memory, like a copy-paste operation. So you copy those settings into memory, switch to another preset, and apply them to that preset. So you can take the wonderful factory presets that are available there, copy out layers, copy out ranks, and put them together into your own presets and create your own sounds out of those building blocks. It's a whole load of fun. Anyway, that is the GX-80. It's a wonderful synthesizer. There's so much there. It sounds fantastic. And of course, it is steeped in history. It really is giving you an insight into the technology and the wonderful soundscapes that you can create with both the GX1 and the CS80.